Hi there, I'm George Michel, amateur musicological sleuth, obsessed with tracking down the influence of Johann Sebastian Bach on composers and musicians since his day to ours. It's an amazing story of 250 plus years of transmissions, transcriptions, and transformations, and it's still going on. No other classical composer of the past, whether it be Mozart, Beethoven, or Wagner, has exhibited such long-lasting magnetism, captivating the imaginations of so many later artists. It's a long and fascinating story, and I plan to tell some of it in this series of podcasts, each of which focuses on what I'm calling the afterlives of one of Bach's famous works. In this, the fifth of my Back to Bach podcast series, we'll be recognizing Bach's musical signature. That is, the four notes of B-flat, A, C, and B natural, which in German notation spell B-A-C-H. This is what they sound like, for I want you to look out for this motif as we listen to works composed in the years after Bach's death. B-flat, A, C, B natural. What other composers that we know of can boast of this unique convergence of a family name and a musical motif? Bach came from a well-established dynasty of professional musicians who must always have known that their family name could be realized in sound. Yet it seems that not one member of this large and illustrious family ever used the B-A-C-H motif in any prominent way, that is, until Johann Sebastian. In his last work, the four-voice fugue that was to serve as the climax of a set of contrapuntal demonstrations, appropriately titled Art of Fugue, we hear after offering one fugue after another of increasing complexity and mathematical invention, Bach arrives at his final proposition, which is a fugue built on multiple themes. For the third of these themes, which is then combined with the previous two, Bach sets off like this, one B-A-C-H voice entering after another. So, now let's hear how this part of the fugue begins with the introduction of B-A-C-H, as played on an organ by Yngwie Jan Trede. Cut off suddenly by blindness, only weeks before his death, Bach was unable to finish writing down this last fugue, even though he must have worked it all out in his head. But why, we might ask, did Bach wait until this final creative moment to quote his musical signature? If we accept that Bach dedicated everything he wrote for the glory of God alone, as he himself put it so often, then perhaps we might understand that only when death was at hand did Bach decide that the time had come for him to sign off. Composers after Bach often referenced the B-A-C-H motif as a way of honoring his life and music. And so, to begin with, they paid homage by writing their own fugues using the B-A-C-H theme. Here is the beginning of one piece of music by Bach's youngest son, Johann Christian, probably written soon after his father died in 1750. At that time, Johann Christian had converted to Catholicism because he had shifted to Milan to accept a post as church organist. So here is a portion of his organ B-A-C-H fugue. and so was launched a veritable profusion of BACH fugues, like this one for the piano by Robert Schumann, dating from 1845. Here, Schumann uses the four BACH notes as a springboard for a bouncing dance-like motif, which he then develops into a complex fugue. Some 10 years later, in 1855, Franz Liszt offered his Fantasia and Fugue on BACH for the organ. It was an instrument that he rarely played in public, but which he realized was better than the piano for his theatrical, melodramatic vision of BACH. For pianists of the Romantic era, melodies that closely resembled BACH offered creative possibilities, as in Chopin's C major study of 1830. Here, the BACH-like theme pounding away in the bottom notes served as a base for impassioned arpeggios sweeping across the keyboard like great waves. Little wonder that the work is known as the Ocean Study. Listen to this virtuosic performance by Kemal Gekic. At this stage, why don't we remind ourselves of the BACH notes, because now we're going to be listening to slight and greater distortions of this theme. So what about this reflective use of a quasi-BACH motif at the beginning of César Franck's Prelude, Chorale and Fugue of 1883? Here the Bach-like theme lies in the middle register of the piano, wreathed in mysterious cascades, here played with impeccable clarity by Nikolai Lugensky. The melodic possibilities of BACH-inspired themes continued to attract composers in more recent times. Let's now listen to a melody that the Italian film composer Ennio Morricone invented for the 1981 French thriller Le Professionnel, often referred to simply as On the Name of Bach. The song is entirely built on repetitions of the 4 BACH notes. As these notes progress downward, they suggest the melancholy yearning of the criminal protagonist, played in the movie by the incomparable Jean-Paul Belmondo. For Alfred Schnittke, who began composing under Soviet rule in Russia, BACH served as a musical motif to bind together the different movements of the piece he wrote for piano and strings after the death of his mother in 1972. 4 years later, he orchestrated it, giving it the name In Memoriam. In the recollection of his mother's love for dance, Schnittke writes a tempo di valse, which begins with BACH, extended with an extra note to serve as a melody in 3/4 time. Any sense of a traditional waltz, however, is subverted by the overlapping BACH notes and the dissonant piano accompaniment. It's a son's bittersweet memory of his mother. And to finish off, what about this much more light-hearted waltz on BACH that Francis Poulenc wrote in 1932 as a show-off piece for Vladimir Horowitz, here played by Gabriel Tocchino. I hope you've enjoyed listening to how Bach's unique musical signature spawned pieces of such variety, from melodramatic proclamations to deeply felt inner feelings and even light-hearted, showy entertainments. If you want to hear and learn more, you need only tune into the next episode.